I was just buying a baby shower gift at the department store when everything changed in an instant. A little boy I'd never seen before ran straight up to me, wrapped his tiny arms around my leg, and looked up with the biggest smile. "Mommy, I found you," he said, his voice filled with pure joy. My heart stopped. This wasn't my child. My son Danny died 2 years ago in a car accident, and I'd spent every day since then avoiding moments exactly like this one. Before I could even process what was happening, a woman came running over, panic written all over her face. "Tommy, get away from her right now. That's not your mother," she shouted, trying to pull him away from me. But Tommy held on tighter and looked up at her with confusion that broke my heart. "But Aunt Maria, you told me she died. You said Mommy died in the hospital. But she's right here." The entire store seemed to freeze. Other shoppers stopped mid-conversation and stared at us. Some pulled out their phones. I could feel dozens of eyes on us as this private moment of grief and confusion became a public spectacle. This little boy thought I was his dead mother, and I was a woman who had lost her own child standing in the middle of a department store, not knowing whether to run away or fall apart, right there on the spot. My name is Sarah Chen, and I'm 32 years old. I work in marketing, live alone in a small apartment downtown, and for the past 2 years, I've structured my entire life around avoiding exactly this kind of situation. I shop during school hours. I cross the street when I see children Danny's age, and I've turned down every invitation to birthday parties, family gatherings, or anywhere else I might encounter kids. My therapist calls it avoidance, but I call it survival. The woman trying to pull Tommy away from me was clearly his Aunt Maria, and she looked like she was about to have a panic attack. Tommy was around 6 years old, the same age Danny was when he died, with dark hair and brown eyes that reminded me nothing of my blonde, blue-eyed son. But everything about the way he looked at me with such hope and desperation felt familiar. I knew that look because I'd worn it myself for months after the accident, searching faces in crowds, hoping against hope that somehow Danny would come running back to me. Standing there in that department store with Tommy's arms still wrapped around my leg and Maria's frantic apologies filling the air, I realized that for the first time in 2 years, a child was hugging me. And despite the pain, despite the confusion, despite everything that was wrong about this moment, part of me didn't want to let go either. This wasn't my son, but for just a few seconds, I remembered what it felt like to be someone's whole world, to be the person a child runs to when they're scared or lost or happy, but the reality crashed back quickly. This little boy was looking for his dead mother, and I was a stranger he'd mistaken for her. The crowd around us was growing, phones were recording, and I could see the judgmental stares from people who had no idea what any of us were going through. Maria kept apologizing and trying to explain that Tommy had been having episodes like this ever since his mother died, but her words were getting lost in the chaos of the moment. What happened next would change all 3 of our lives forever. But in that first moment, all I could think about was how Danny used to run to me exactly like this when I picked him up from preschool. How he'd wrap his arms around my legs and tell me about his day in that excited, breathless way that only 6-year-olds can manage. How I'd give anything to have that moment back, and how cruel it felt that life was giving me this echo of it instead. Let me back up and tell you how I ended up in that department store in the first place, because the truth is, I had no business being there at all. It was a Tuesday afternoon in March, and I was supposed to be at work finishing a presentation for a client meeting. Instead, I was standing in the children's section at Macy's, holding a tiny yellow onesie that said, "Little Sunshine," and trying not to have a complete breakdown. My sister Jessica was having her baby shower that weekend, and I'd been putting off buying a gift for weeks. Every time I thought about walking into a store and looking at baby clothes, my chest would tighten, and I'd find some excuse to do it later. But Jessica had called me that morning, and I could hear the hurt in her voice when she asked if I was really going to come to the shower, or if I was going to bail like I had on her birthday party and her engagement celebration. "Sarah, I know this is hard for you," she'd said, her voice gentle but firm. "But I need my sister there. This baby is going to be your nephew, and I want him to know his aunt." The way she said it made me realize I'd been disappearing from my own family's life, not just avoiding strangers' children. So I promised her I'd be there, and I promised myself I'd buy something beautiful for the baby. The problem was that I'd specifically chosen to shop at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday because I thought the store would be empty of families. In my carefully constructed world, I'd figured out all the safe times and places. Grocery shopping at 10 a.m. when kids were in school. Movies at the earliest possible showing on weeknights. Even my route to work avoided the elementary school 6 blocks from my apartment. I'd become an expert at navigating life without encountering the reminders of what I'd lost. But standing there in that store, surrounded by tiny clothes and stuffed animals and all the things I'd once bought for Danny, I realized how exhausting it had become to live like this. Every decision filtered through the question of whether I might see a child who looked like him or sounded like him, or even just existed in the same space where he should have been. Danny had been gone for exactly 2 years and 3 months. Not that I was counting, except I was counting every single day. The accident happened on a Wednesday morning in December. I was running late for work and rushing to get him to preschool. The last thing he said to me was, "Mommy, you forgot to tell me you love me." I remember laughing and calling back, "I love you, Danny Bear," as I watched him run into the building with his little backpack bouncing. 3 hours later, a drunk driver ran a red light and hit the school bus that was taking Danny's class on a field trip to the fire station. 5 children were injured. Only Danny didn't make it home. The months after that were a blur of casseroles from neighbors, therapy appointments I didn't want to attend, and well-meaning friends who kept telling me that time would heal everything. What they didn't understand was that I didn't want to heal if healing meant moving on from Danny. So instead, I built this careful, controlled life where I could function without constantly being reminded of what was missing. I'd been seeing Dr. Martinez for about 18 months, and she kept pushing me to engage with the world again. "Avoidance isn't protecting you from pain, Sarah," she'd say during our sessions. "It's just postponing it and making it harder to process." But what she didn't understand was that the alternative felt impossible. How do you go to Target and walk past the toy section without remembering the last time you bought Hot Wheels cars? How do you hear a child laugh at the park without your heart breaking all over again? Standing in Macy's that day, I'd been making progress, or at least that's what I told myself. I'd managed to pick out 3 different onesies, a soft blue blanket, and a set of board books. I was actually feeling proud of myself for getting through the shopping trip without crying, which had become my new definition of a successful day. I was wearing a blue sweater without even realizing it was Danny's favorite color. He used to say blue was the color of the sky where angels lived, which was something he'd learned from his Sunday school teacher. After he died, I'd put away everything blue in my closet because it hurt too much to see it. But that morning, I'd grabbed the sweater without thinking, and now I wondered if some part of me had been preparing for this moment all along. The store was busy but not crowded, filled with the usual Tuesday afternoon shoppers, a few moms with strollers, some teenagers browsing jewelry, and elderly couples taking their time through the home goods section. It felt safe and manageable, exactly the kind of environment I'd learned to navigate. I had no idea that in 5 minutes, everything I thought I knew about protecting myself from pain was about to be completely turned upside down. I was examining a set of baby books when I felt it. Small arms wrapping around my leg with the kind of desperate strength that only comes from a child who's been searching for something precious. At first, I thought maybe I'd accidentally gotten in someone's way, but then I heard the voice that made my world stop spinning. "Mommy, I found you. I was looking everywhere for you." The voice was high and breathless with excitement, filled with the kind of pure joy that I remembered from Danny's voice when he'd spot me picking him up from school. My body went completely rigid, every muscle tensed as my brain tried to process what was happening. I looked down and saw a little boy with dark hair that was slightly messy, like he'd been running. His brown eyes were bright with happiness and relief, and he was looking up at me like I was the answer to every prayer he'd ever made. He wasn't Danny. This boy was maybe a little taller. His hair was darker and his eyes were brown instead of blue. But he was the same age Danny would have been now if he'd lived. 6 years old with that particular way of holding on to an adult like they were the most important person in the universe. The similarity in age hit me like a physical blow. But what really broke my heart was the expression on his face. He looked at me with such complete trust and love that I felt my carefully constructed walls start to crumble. "Sweetheart," I managed to whisper, my voice catching in my throat. I think you might have me confused with someone else." But he shook his head vigorously, his grip on my leg tightening. "No, you're my mommy. I knew I'd find you. Aunt Maria said you couldn't come back, but you're here." His voice carried that particular mix of triumph and relief that children get when they've proven the adults wrong about something important. That's when I heard the running footsteps, fast, panicked footsteps that belonged to someone in crisis. I looked up to see a young woman rushing toward us, her face flushed and her eyes wide with what looked like terror. She was probably in her late 20s with the same dark hair as the boy, and she was clearly his family based on the way she immediately reached for him. "Tommy, Tommy, no!" she called out, her voice sharp with panic. "Get away from her right now. That's not your mother." The harshness in her tone made Tommy flinch, but he didn't let go of me. Instead, he pressed closer, like he was trying to protect himself from her words. "But she looks like Mommy," he said, his voice getting smaller and more confused. "She smells like Mommy, too." The woman, who I assumed was his Aunt Maria based on what he'd called her, reached us and immediately started trying to pry Tommy's arms away from my leg. "I'm so sorry," she said to me, her voice shaking with embarrassment and fear. "He's been doing this. Ever since Lisa died, he's been running up to strangers. I turned my back for 1 second to look at shoes, and he disappeared." But Tommy wasn't having it. He looked up at Maria with an expression that was part confusion and part accusation, and what he said next made the entire department store fall silent. "But Aunt Maria, you told me she died. You said Mommy died in the hospital and couldn't come home anymore, but she's right here, and she's not dead." The words hung in the air like a physical thing. I could feel every person within hearing distance stop what they were doing and turn to look at us. Conversations died mid-sentence. Shopping bags stopped rustling. Even the background music from the store's speakers seemed to fade as everyone absorbed what this little boy had just said. Maria's face went completely white. She looked like she might faint or throw up or both. "Tommy, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "This isn't Mommy. Mommy is gone, remember? We talked about this." "No!" Tommy's voice rose to a near shout, filled with the kind of desperate defiance that comes from a child who's had their reality questioned too many times. "You're lying. You told me she was dead, but she's not. She's right here. Tell her, Mommy, tell Aunt Maria you're not dead." I felt tears starting to burn behind my eyes. This little boy was living in the same impossible space I'd been occupying for 2 years, the place where logic and hope collide and create nothing but pain. He wanted his mother back so desperately that he was willing to believe a complete stranger could be her. And I understood that feeling so completely it made my chest ache. People were definitely staring now. I could see phones being pulled out, whispered conversations starting, and the kind of crowd that gathers when something dramatic happens in a public place. But all I could focus on was Tommy's face, the way he was looking between Maria and me like we held the power to either save his world or destroy it completely. That's when I realized I had a choice to make that would change everything. In that moment, with Tommy's arm still wrapped around my leg and Maria looking like she was about to collapse from embarrassment and panic, I had 2 choices. I could do what I'd been doing for 2 years and walk away. I could gently remove Tommy's arms, mumble an apology to Maria, and disappear into the crowd of shoppers who were now watching us like we were performing some kind of tragic street theater. That would have been the safe choice, the choice that protected my carefully constructed bubble of emotional safety. Instead, I did something that surprised even me. I knelt down. Getting to Tommy's eye level meant looking directly into those brown eyes that were filled with so much hope and confusion. It meant seeing the tear tracks on his cheeks that I hadn't noticed before, and the way his little hands were trembling as he held onto my sweater. It meant acknowledging that this wasn't just about my pain anymore. "Tommy," I said softly, using his name for the first time, "can you tell me about your mommy? What was she like?" Maria made a small sound of protest behind me. "Ma'am, you don't have to do this. I can handle him. We'll just go." But I held up my hand without taking my eyes off Tommy. Something about this little boy's desperation felt familiar in a way that went beyond just recognizing grief. He reminded me of myself in those first months after Danny died. When I'd see a blonde child at the grocery store and follow them down 3 aisles before reality crashed back in. She had hair like yours, Tommy said, reaching up to touch a strand of my dark hair. And she always smelled like flowers. She used to read me stories about dragons, and she made the best chocolate chip pancakes in the whole world. She called me her little knight because I was brave. Each word he spoke made my heart break a little more, but also made something else happen that I hadn't expected. I started to remember what it felt like to talk about Danny without immediately shutting down. She sounds like she was an amazing mom, I told him. And you know what? I bet she still thinks you're the bravest little knight she knows. But where did she go? Tommy asked, his voice getting smaller. Aunt Maria says she's in heaven, but I looked up at the sky and I can't see her. And sometimes at night, I hear Aunt Maria crying on the phone, saying she can't do this anymore. I thought if I found Mommy, then Aunt Maria wouldn't be sad. That's when Maria completely broke down. She sank into a nearby chair and put her face in her hands, her whole body shaking with sobs she'd clearly been holding back for months. I can't, she whispered. I don't know how to do this. Lisa was supposed to be here. She was the one who knew how to answer these questions. I'm just his aunt. I don't know how to be his mother. Looking at Maria fall apart while Tommy stood there trying to process emotions that were too big for his 6-year-old heart, I realized something important. I'd been so focused on protecting myself from pain that I'd forgotten how isolating grief could be. Here was a woman who was drowning in the same kind of loss I was, and a little boy who was searching for his mother in the faces of strangers because the truth was too hard to accept. Maria, I said, still kneeling next to Tommy but looking at her. How long has it been since Tommy's mom died? 6 months, she choked out. My sister Lisa had cancer. She fought for 2 years, and I kept telling Tommy she was going to get better because I couldn't bear to see him give up hope. But when she died, he couldn't understand why I'd been lying to him. And I didn't know how to explain death to a 6-year-old when I could barely accept it myself. I felt something shift inside my chest, like a door I'd kept locked for 2 years was finally starting to open. Tommy, I said, taking his small hands in mine, I want to tell you something. I had a little boy, too. His name was Danny, and he died in an accident 2 years ago. I miss him every single day, just like you miss your mommy. Tommy's eyes widened. You had a little boy? Where is he now? He's in the same place your mommy is, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. And I've been just as scared and sad as you are, but I learned something important. Missing someone doesn't mean they're really gone. It means we love them so much that we carry them with us everywhere we go. Can you teach me how to do that? Tommy asked. Because I don't want to forget her, but it hurts so much to remember. That's when I made the decision that would change all of our lives. What if we helped each other remember? And what if we helped Aunt Maria too? What happened next still gives me chills when I think about it. Tommy looked at me with those serious brown eyes and asked, Will you come home with us so you can teach me how to remember without it hurting so much? Maria's head snapped up from her hands. Tommy, we can't ask this lady to come to our house. She's a stranger. But something had shifted in the air between the 3 of us. I could feel it, and I think they could too. Actually, I said, looking at Maria, maybe we could just talk for a few more minutes. There's a coffee shop in the mall. I think we all need to sit down. 20 minutes later, we were sitting in a corner booth at the food court, Tommy between Maria and me, sharing a chocolate chip cookie that was probably his dinner, but none of us cared. And that's when the real truth started coming out. I've been lying to him, Maria said, her voice barely above a whisper. Not just about Lisa being dead, but about everything. I've been pretending I can handle this, pretending I know what I'm doing, pretending I'm not completely falling apart. She looked at Tommy, who was carefully breaking his cookie into small pieces. Tommy, remember when you heard me on the phone last week, when I was talking to Grandma Rosa? Tommy nodded, not looking up from his cookie. I wasn't just sad about Mommy being gone. I was scared because I don't know how to take care of you the way she did. I don't know how to make pancakes without burning them, or how to do the voice for the dragon in your bedtime stories, or how to answer your questions about where Mommy went. But you're doing it, Tommy said quietly. You're taking care of me. I'm trying, Maria said, tears streaming down her face. But I'm so scared I'm going to mess everything up. Your mommy was the one who was good with kids. I'm just a 28-year-old who works at a bank and has never even had a houseplant live longer than 6 months. That's when Tommy looked up at her with an expression that was far too mature for his age. Aunt Maria, were you going to give me away? Is that why you were crying on the phone? The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Maria's face went completely white, and I could see her trying to figure out how to answer without devastating this little boy even more. Tommy, she said finally, I would never give you away. Ever. But I did call Grandma Rosa to ask if maybe you could come live with her for a while, just until I figured out how to be better at taking care of you. But I don't want to live with Grandma Rosa, Tommy said, his voice getting higher. She lives far away and she doesn't know about my trucks or my favorite pajamas, or that I can't sleep without the nightlight that looks like a star. I know, Maria whispered. That's why I couldn't do it. That's why I told her no. But Tommy, I need you to know that sometimes I don't know what I'm doing. That's when I realized why Tommy had been running up to strangers in stores. He wasn't just looking for his mother. He was looking for someone who could give him the stability and love he was afraid he was going to lose again. Tommy, I said, can I tell you something? When my little boy Danny died, I thought I had to be perfect at handling it. I thought I had to have all the right answers and never cry and never admit that I was scared. But you know what I learned? The people who love us don't need us to be perfect. They just need us to be honest. I looked at Maria. And Maria, you don't have to be Tommy's mother. You just have to be his Aunt Maria who loves him and is trying her best. But what if my best isn't good enough? Maria asked. Then we figure it out together, I said, surprising myself with the words. What if you didn't have to do this alone? Tommy's face lit up. You mean like a team? Like the Avengers? I laughed, and it was the first time I'd laughed in months without feeling guilty about it. Exactly like the Avengers, but instead of saving the world, we help each other. Can you teach me how to remember Mommy without getting so sad that I can't breathe? Tommy asked. And can you teach me how to make pancakes that don't look like burned hockey pucks? Maria added. And can you both teach me how to stop being so scared of living again? I asked. Tommy reached across the table and took both of our hands. Deal, but we have to promise to tell each other the truth, even when it's scary. Deal, Maria and I said at the same time. And just like that, our lives changed forever. That was 6 months ago, and I'm sitting here today telling you this story because I want you to understand something important about grief, about family, and about the unexpected ways life can surprise you when you finally stop running from it. Tommy, Maria, and I didn't just exchange phone numbers that day and go back to our separate lives. We became something I never expected to find again after losing Danny. We became a family, just not the kind that looks like anything you'd see in a greeting card. The first month was messy and complicated and beautiful all at once. Tommy started coming to my apartment twice a week after school, while Maria worked late at the bank. I taught him how to make Danny's favorite blue pancakes, the ones with way too much food coloring that turn your tongue bright blue for hours. He taught me that it's okay to cry when you're telling stories about people you love, and that sometimes the best way to honor someone's memory is to laugh at the funny things they used to do. Maria and I started meeting for coffee every Sunday morning, just the two of us to talk about the hard stuff. How do you discipline a grieving child? How do you answer questions about death when you're barely handling your own grief? How do you build a life around loss without letting the loss become your whole life? We figured it out together, one conversation at a time. But the biggest change happened about 3 months in, when Tommy asked me something that changed everything. We were at the park watching him play on the swings that I'd avoided for 2 years because they reminded me too much of Danny. Miss Sarah, he said, do you think Danny and my mommy know each other in heaven? I'd been dreading a question like this because I didn't know how to talk about heaven or the afterlife or any of the big spiritual questions that come with losing someone you love. But sitting there watching Tommy swing higher and higher, I realized I didn't need to have all the answers. I just needed to be honest. I don't know, I told him, but I like to think they do. I like to think Danny is teaching your mommy how to play with trucks, and she's teaching him how to make really good pancakes. And maybe they're both watching us be a family, Tommy said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. That's when it hit me. We weren't just helping each other cope with grief. We were actually building something new and beautiful from the pieces of our broken hearts. Tommy had two adults who loved him unconditionally. Maria had support and friendship and someone who understood the weight of suddenly becoming responsible for a child. And I had something I thought I'd lost forever: the chance to be part of a little boy's life, to matter to someone who needed me. Last month, Tommy started calling me Aunt Sarah, not because anyone told him to, but because that's what felt right to him. Maria and I are officially co-guardians now, which means when Tommy grows up, he'll have two women who fought for him, who chose him, who built their lives around making sure he felt loved and secure. But here's the thing I want you to understand. If you're watching this and you're dealing with your own loss, your own grief, your own fear of moving forward, healing doesn't mean forgetting. Healing doesn't mean replacing what you lost. Healing means learning to carry love forward instead of just carrying pain. I still miss Danny every single day. I still have moments where I see a blonde little boy at the grocery store and my heart stops for just a second. But now I also have Tommy's artwork on my refrigerator, and Maria's terrible cooking experiments to laugh about, and Sunday morning pancakes that turn everyone's teeth blue. The most important thing I learned is that family isn't just about blood or marriage or the traditional structures we grow up expecting. Sometimes family is a grieving aunt who doesn't know how to make pancakes, and a little boy who's brave enough to hug strangers when he's looking for love, and a broken woman who thought she'd never be anyone's safe harbor again. We're not perfect. We still have hard days. Tommy still asks difficult questions about his mother, and Maria still calls me crying when she doesn't know how to handle something. And I still sometimes feel guilty for being happy when Danny isn't here to be happy with me. But we've learned to tell each other the truth, even when it's scary. We've learned that love multiplies instead of divides when you share it. And we've learned that sometimes the most healing thing you can do is help someone else heal. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. Comment below and tell me about the unexpected family you've found or the moment when helping someone else helped you heal too. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel because every week I share stories about finding hope in the hardest places and love in the most unexpected moments. Remember, you're not alone in your grief and you're stronger than you think.